this picturesque village of Schzig is unique, not only because of its beauty, but because of the fact that during the occupation, the Germans never came here, although they occupied the towns which were quite nearby. Little did they know that up in the hills surrounding Schzig were masses of Frenchmen already in the marquee, others were already joining up. Soon they were to be armed by the British. That was why I was here with my colleague. I said that Gaspard sent us over here, I think, to get rid of us. But in the end, it was Henri Fournier who gained by it, because Gaspard didn't want us because we'd lost our radio operator. But once we got our radio operator, we were still here with Henri Fournier, and quite obviously, as he'd been so nice to us, we armed his marquee first.
The plateau above the town was chosen for the vital weapon airdrops. Henri Fournier and his marquee group had surveyed the whole area and had decided it was ideal to receive, unpack, and distribute the containers from England, then return to the safety of their homes, undetected by German patrols.
We'd be up here from 10 o'clock at night getting the fields ready. We would expect the planes between 10:30 at night and 4 in the morning. If they didn't come, which sometimes they were intercepted on the way, well, we went home. Mostly they came, unless it was, of course, weather, but we were pretty lucky actually here. These containers were packed with thousands of Sten guns, dozens of Bren machine guns, grenades, explosives, and literally thousands of rounds of ammunition. The nicest thing about it was, from my own point of view, was every month I got my personal parcels from London, and I'd open it. It'd be lovely. I'd get my face cream, Lizzie Arden face cream, and powders, cosmetics, and stockings if I'd asked for them, or shoes, something I couldn't get in France. We were looked after very well, you know, by S.O.E, and I can only say that that was the most wonderful feeling, to be up in the mountains in the Auvergne, in the middle of nowhere, and then to get a little parcel and to know that you hadn't been forgotten from England. They were wonderful to us. All over the countryside, when the people who wanted to help the resistance heard that the arms were coming, we had a recruiting drive. We started off with, in the whole area, not only in this area, but in the whole area of Auvergne, we had about 3,000. Over 3,000 men. Mind you, we had nothing to do with that. That was Gaspard's business to get his men. But by the time we'd finished our recruiting drive, there were over 7,000.
The containers received from England were distributed among the various marquee groups. Although it was a large cache of weapons, it was expert instructions in their use that was badly needed, as Nancy and her colleagues could not afford time for this. Weapons instructor René Dussac, nicknamed Bazooka for his love of that weapon, was dropped into France near Montluçon, but the resistance contact there had been arrested by the Nazis.
When we got up to the outskirts of Montluçon, we hid the car and the driver in the bush, and I bicycled off into the town on my bicycle, and I went all over the place. I had one clue, that a contact had been the housekeeper for an ambassador in Paris before the occupation, and I inquired all over the place, and I eventually found her, and I knew she was a fabulous cook, and I knocked on the door and she opened it, and I had no password. I said, Madame Renard, well, I'm Andre and I come from Bazooka, and she looked very apprehensive, and I said, oh, Baba Rom, you're baking cakes, I know all about you, and she let me in. And she called out to Bazooka that it was somebody for him, and opened the cupboard door, and Bazooka was there with the Colt, and he looked at me and he says, oh, Gertie. He always called me Gertie. And that was another sad thing for me, because I missed the D-Day, because while I was away they landed.
By D-Day, the resistance, armed and trained, were ready to fight. Bridges, power plants, cable lines began to disappear. Special attention was paid to rail and rolling stock, so the Germans could not get the maximum use and efficiency from France's very comprehensive rail network to move men and equipment to the Normandy front line. The resistance fighters of France had now become a highly trained internal army, effectively employing guerrilla tactics against the Nazis, with sabotage and the ambush of German convoys. But with the Marquis de Verne's growing success came the Nazi response. Outnumbering them 7-1, crack German SS units retaliated and attacked Gaspar's headquarters at Montmouchet.
If you could look around this area, you would see how easy it was for the Marquis to defend themselves against the Germans. It's an enormous area, and that is why the Germans had to use so many people when they did finally attack Gaspar and his men. Gaspar and his men were magnificent. They fought like tigers, and they all got out of this area safely. They had very few losses compared to the losses the Germans had. And behind me is this memorial dedicated to Gaspar. Lots of people have a false idea about a woman living amongst so many men. But this country was known as the fortress of France. It's very mountainous and a lot of pine trees. Even if I'd had the idea, I mean, pine trees aren't terribly comfortable and they're not very conducive to love affairs. Yes, there were some good-looking men in the Marquis, and there were 7,000 spread all over the area. No love affairs with the resistance, and in my old age I regret it. But you see, if I'd accommodated one man, the word would have spread around and I would have had to accommodate the whole damn lot. I remember that in Australia, a few years ago, some charming men said it's not possible that she did what she did. It is possible, because it's on record. I did what I did. I remember one person who wrote an article. I think he or she had a very thick head. That person wrote in a magazine that the war was incidental to my life. The war was not incidental to my life. I lost a husband who was executed. I lost friends who were tortured, who were killed by the Germans. I lost financially. I lost a lot. The war was not incidental to my life. Oh, well, sometimes, you know, people ask me what I think was the best thing I ever did during my days with the Marquis. I think that in retrospect, probably the most useful thing I ever did was that bike ride of mine, because after all, I was not a cyclist.
20,000 Germans were thrown into a final effort to break up the Marquis. The radio operator, Dennis Rake, had buried his wireless set and codes during the confusion. It became a matter of life and death to make contact with London. Nancy took it upon herself to cycle through enemy territory. She headed north to where she believed the nearest operator could get a message through.
And I can always remember